but also with individuals, that hopefully one of the things that we'll be able to do is to have the conversation about what would this look like in the digital environment, and how would we make this so it is conducive to that learning that we want to get across. So a lot of people are saying that the students are thinking, they're writing, they're talking.
And I guess maybe our question should be is, are we seeing our students do the same thing in a distance learning format? I think Matt mentioned, obviously my intention wasn't for you to miss like, oh, I miss, being with students, because you can actually get close to them, but it's a reality. You're right. I mean, just the idea of, the real person being next to us is a real part of learning experience. But can we still get those write, pair, share kind of activities going? Can we still have, the small group, those same questions that are still that are really important questions about a segue between absolutism and obviously, the French Revolution in this case?
Yeah, Morgan asked the question or makes a comment that the question was created for them as opposed to the students creating any kind of question. So that's a challenge of getting kids to think in questions as opposed to thinking in response. So that's good. So
was every student on task right away when she asked? No, right? She did the same thing we need to do in terms of proximity. What do we do for proximity when it's distance learning? What is our option? Yeah, that's a challenge. That is, especially if you do breakout rooms. I mean, it's pretty distant, and so oftentimes we have to give that a little bit of that up and just, continue to leave it whole group, but allowing just a few students to kind of share their ideas with others. Has anybody tried doing like a private chats? So if you have like your desired partners, so the idea, let's say for example, Carla and Teresa, hey, I want you to respond to each other. Matt and Keisha, I want you to respond to each other. And I can actually go back and download the chat as a reference. So Matt, go ahead.
I would just say, I mean, I was in an AVID class today. Great kids, but it's just at a snail's pace getting to know each other. They come from different junior highs, and it's like, all right, guys, getting a breakout, and I'm not giving them hard questions, just, the low stuff, like the getting to know you stuff still. And, I'll pop into a room and it's like, they'll private message me, Mr. Kantak, they're not talking. It's like, oh man. So yeah, there's a lot of that. And I feel like it's just at a snail's pace digitally, and we have half the time. So it's a challenge.
Anyone else? What are some moves that we saw the teacher do? And I think I saw some things in the chat, but anybody, what did the teacher do in terms of to get a desired result from her students? That's a reality, Carla. Yeah, in terms of there was just way too much chat in your classroom, and obviously must have been a chat that was irrelevant, right? A lot of irrelevant conversations.
Yeah, and they don't know how to they don't know how to be polite, and that the context really, they have to watch how they say it, not just what they say, but how they say it in the chat, and it might be misconstrued by the teacher or other people. So I disabled it. I mean, middle school, right? They're used to texting.
You're in the belly of the beast. If you're gonna have anything, be a challenge, it's gonna be middle school, definitely. Teresa, you mentioned the idea of obviously those physical prompts, in terms of that. Those of you who've done those breakout rooms or those, small, groups, what have you done that's made it successful, or what challenges have come up?
I find that oftentimes when I go into the breakout room, there's nothing going on in the breakout room. Even if they have a shared document, they have like organizers, they have a task, they'll still just kind of sit there and they might work on the document, but with no talking, or they'll use the chat to question each other, but they won't actually like engage with each other.
I think that's one of the things that I've noticed the most. I think you're right. I mean, the idea is, I see it at home, my kids too, when there's very little conversation going on when they're doing a breakout room, and it's just, it's almost dead silence, you know, which is not that there's anything there, but that's just the reality. So I'm not sure what others are trying to do to kind of get to bring kids back alive.
Part of it's let's just like with us, you know, it's new, it's uncomfortable. It's a new process. And so I think, yeah, and then we also have, thank you, Teresa, for, you know, joining that, adding that too. It's the glitching or getting bumped off and what have you. That's a great example, what we go through in our meetings. It's the same thing that our students are going through too. So, you know, we're going to get there. I think that some of the things that we're learning in the distance learning is going to change our teaching forever, because there are things that we're going to keep going with, but we're seeing the challenges as well. I think it's going to make us stronger teachers, and hopefully it'll make our students stronger students too, because I've also seen a lot of resilience and self-motivation from my own son and as he's been doing this. A lot more personal responsibility on his part. And as a high school student, I've questioned some of that the last couple of years with him, but he's looking better with it. So we'll get there. As far as with Google Meet in terms of the chat, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with some of the chat features and all in Google Meets. Is there somebody that uses Google Meet, whether they can private chat between two students? I'm not sure.
I use Google Meet, and I'm not familiar with the chat. Partly it has to do with, I don't think our district wants us doing that right now. There's like privacy concerns, that kind of thing. So as far as I know, we're limited on what we can do with peer collaboration. I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Cool.
Okay.
So the first tool that we're going to be talking about, we're actually talking about two tools in particular today. One is just a regular history tool, and the other one's going to be a digital tool. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Can you all see that? All right, so in terms of, and there are different variations, so I'll share the other options as well, but the historical thinking cards are prompts that go with them. So this is actually physically the front of the card. So you see the author one, we're going to use that one. We're going to also use historical context and also what's in the document. So that middle one on the right-hand side with the pencil next to the scroll. So those are the three we're going to use today, but obviously all of them have a purpose. And the idea is that there's questions that will prompt the students to help them guide what their role is, especially when you're going into breakout rooms and like, okay, what are they going to do? And not saying it's going to answer this is going to address the major issue of the lack of conversation, but at least it tells them what their role is and what they need to do, right? So for instance, if I go to, the author who wrote the document, it's very simple, right? And is there any information on the occupation and background? But really the most important question is this: how does this information help me understand this document, and also maybe address the question that we're asking? So this image, especially the first one, is actually a hyperlink. So if you wanted to ever print these out, you can actually download it in a PDF and do that to access them. So we're going to access them through our digital tool, which is Jamboard. So our tool of the day is going to be Jamboard. Just really quick, in terms of show of hands, how many of you are pretty familiar with Jamboard? And if you're not, give me a thumbs down. Yeah, kind of somewhat. Okay, down. Okay, so about half of you. Okay, so we'll do it really quick.
The best way I can describe Jamboard is like if you were to put a poster up in your classroom and then gave them each a sticky note, and they get to write a sticky note of an idea, and then they bring the sticky note to the poster.
So this is a Jamboard, and it's a Google extension. You may have to ask your IT department to be able to access it. You can also do this on a slide deck as well. If you have a single document, sometimes I find those can be a little bit difficult to manage, especially if some students are intentionally disrupting that. So this is nice if you give certain groups certain links, makes it a little bit easier. But on the left-hand side, your menu, you have the tools. So you have a pen so you can write. It's a little messy, so I wouldn't necessarily use that too much. But as Stacy mentioned, a sticky note, you can type, right? And now it's there. I can click off of it. You can use, let's just go back to your cursor. If you want to add an image in there, that's how I added this image here. In terms of a circle to highlight something, so I can go ahead and do that to just, you know, it's an annotation tool really more than anything else, and it allows you to do that. You know, a text box, which is kind of a newer feature that they're doing, but, you know, Jamboard, I can make it bigger as I want. So there's different things you can do. You're going to do the same thing. So it's going to be our tool that we use. An important thing to think about with those tools is that it has different frames. And you can see 7 frames here. We're going to use all of them today. But also, if you want to use this with your students, you know, you click on the share button. You need to make sure that share button that it's, you know, it's accessible and that everybody who has access to it can edit it. See if you can see down here that edit. So change, or I can actually change it to just view, but everybody, you want them to be able to edit so they can manipulate that document, annotate, or whatever they're doing as a group. So any questions regarding Jamboard? I can actually see anybody now, so I'm assuming there's no questions.
Well, wait a minute. Is it
Carla,
one of the little buttons on Google? On Google? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So, and if anybody has questions specifically about a digital tool that you're not sure of, stick around after and we'll help you out specifically. Or if we take
can I just ask if everybody's on the same document, can you click on something that says who posted it without them writing their name on it?
So are you asking me in terms of,
Sometimes.
go ahead, Stacy.
You can see as they're doing it, their little person that's up here on, I'm not sharing my screen. The little people that are listed, like at the top, you can see their little person. So you have to be quick because teaching 4th grade, it's tricky because I had doodlers. I came back after Jose taught me this over the summer and tried it really well, and I had doodlers. They were crazy doodlers. So I had to be very quick and click, but I could do it. You just have to be prepared for quick intervention with that. You can see it as they're doing it. Once they submit it, I don't know how to tell.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there is an anonymous, I guess, aspect to this. And it's kind of part of it is designed that way just so that students can share their ideas and thinking without necessarily being, you know, kind of like with chat. Sometimes the issue with chat is some students are really slow typers or they might be bad at spelling, but here there's an anonymity so it can be used that way as well. So think about it in terms of an option. What do you want from your students? Maybe one might be better than the other. So I'm going to ask you to go to slide number 17. And here's your question. And I want you to think about your students. So student in your classroom, you know, how would they answer this question? You're going to answer it on Jamboard, that very first frame. What would you do if you found this gold nugget here? Click on that link. It should take you there and should be able to answer that question. And whoever added the, I think it's a Ferrari, it's a really small emblem. There you go, you can move it, perfect. Buying a house is nice. It's a smart investment. Vacation home, nice. That was me. So very simple in terms of strategy. There was a reason why I had all of you kind of jump in and do this, is to try out this tool in a low stake setting. And for those of you who already use it, obviously you're fine. But those who've kind of maybe only tried it one or two times, it would be a nice little practice. And especially for our students. Yeah, a little bit late, but nice. Yeah, you can also add an image, which is cool. Like the idea is that students can share their thinking a different way. I'm not sure if that's Hawaii or Mexico, but either way, it wouldn't be a bad option at all, especially with the blue sky there.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Of course.
So I have a bunch of Jamboards that I use, and every morning I use one for check-in, how kids are feeling, good, you know, bad, okay. But I always wonder about where it says open on a Jamboard, because I think I'm on a Jamboard. So then when I click on that up in the top right, it says open on a Jamboard. I don't understand why that's there.
Okay, so actually there's actually essentially like a TV screen that's a Jamboard.
Oh, okay.
Google created physically a Jamboard that's an interactive screen. And that's where the idea came from. So they took that app on a physical Jamboard, which is kind of, you know, think about a huge TV screen that you can just write on it. So a huge tablet, that's what I would call it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. Definitely get in there. So why did I ask this question? It's really because I wanted you to start thinking about what I want you to start thinking about. And that is thinking about gold, and specifically the gold rush here in California. And so the inquiry question, and I think I'm going to go back to what Morgan said, is you're right, I'm creating this question, right? And so how was gold discovered in California, and inquiry activity? So what we're going to do is we're going to break out into groups of 3 or 4. And I'm going to give you about 7 minutes, more or less, per source. We have 3 primary sources, right? So partner 1, and you guys can figure out who partner 1, 2, and 3 is. You have access to the slide deck. Partner 1, your job is to share with your partners or the rest of your group what type of document it is. And you're going to use the historical thinking cards to kind of guide you and help you. Partner 2, you're going to actually tell them what type of document it is. It's pretty simple, but still the important thing is, how does it help you address the inquiry question, which is, if we go back up, how was gold discovered in California, right? And partner 3, you're going to write down who is the writer author, right? But ultimately, all 3 of these historical thinking cards are going to help us address the question, how was gold discovered in California? Everyone back? Perfect. Let's go ahead and get started. So good. So let's see, in terms of information, so can we determine how or when gold was discovered based on the primary sources that we read? Anybody want to jump in on this?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so based on the sources you read, can we determine how gold or when was gold discovered?
Yes.
Yes, yes. So were all the details, did all the sources corroborate each other? Were there any conflicting details? Did anybody notice that?
We noticed, because you helped us notice, that in one it said it was found in the morning in his account, I believe, and then in her account it was in the evening. Different times.
Right, so his I think would be James Marshall, right? And then Joanne Sutter would be in the evening, is that correct? Anybody else notice that difference as well?
You know, I'm so sorry. We just stayed on one.
That's fine, no worries, it's okay.
I'm so sorry. That's why I'm not entering into the conversation.
That's a part of it too. I assumed I was going a little bit fast, but I wasn't sure. So there was actually some details that were different. So then I think, let's go back. Let's say James Marshall in his diary, he mentioned this idea that, you know what, he found this gold in the morning, and then Joanne Sutter, you know, was in the evening. That discrepancy, what source would be more credible, and why?
Well, I would say his source, because it's actually he who found it. And so the diary is basically something she's remembering and journaling, but his account of it, if he's the one who discovered it, would be more accurate.
Right. Anybody else? What if we go back to Joanne Sutter's?
Well, I just need to correct something here. This is Johann Sutter. This is
Johann.
John Sutter.
Yeah.
So this is the guy who owns the mill. So
Johann Sutter. Yeah.
Johann. This is John Sutter. This is better. He's Swiss, and so I think Swiss German. So that's where we get Johann, and that's where we get his name John when it becomes anglicized.
So then does that change anything? When is the date of Johann or John Sutter's journal entry? Or at least when was it, at least this source, when was this source written?
On the 28th, I thought. 18, I don't know.
Yeah, January 28th.
January 28th. So if we look down here at the bottom, the diary of Johann Sutter, introduction by Douglas Watson, San Francisco, right? And so it was published in 1932.
Yeah, there was 2 discrepancies when we looked at the journal, because he, in the journal itself, he refers to a date. His journal entry is a date at the top, and then also at the bottom, it was published much later. So that was kind of tricky for the kids on the timeline to really think about when he put it in his journal, but when the date he referred to it happening, and then when it was published into the newspaper.
Yeah, so you see, obviously there's a discrepancy within even that primary source, right? So once again, we go back to, like, if we had to say as a historian, which one would be the more accurate one, which would it be?
Well, we couldn't ascertain where exactly the Marshall source came from. We know it's a quote, but we don't know if it was a quote in a newspaper or in a diary, or so that'd be one thing. With Sutter's, we also know because the person who edited the diary and published it in almost 100 years later, 80, 90 years later, there were some editing pieces in there too. So.
And obviously most would not know that particular detail, but just knowing that there's a discrepancy in there, obviously, questions the validity or the credibility of that source. That's all it is. And really at this point, maybe we can't ascertain exactly when the date was, but we know there's a discrepancy there. We know it was January. We know it was, and sometime during the winter, we just don't know exactly when, and there's differences there. But at least it gets them thinking about, there's discrepancies in historical documents all the time. If we had to choose one, can we? And if not, then we need to search further. That's part of the process. Now, it's a quick little inquiry activity. We actually did a little bit different in terms of, with group 3, and which we'll talk about in a second. But really the important thing is, doing something like this is asking this question here. Thinking about your students, how would you scaffold, this activity so that they would be successful, or at least be able to access the information? Because there's a lot of steps that we missed because of the sake of time, but I think in terms of, success, whether you're talking about in elementary school, middle school, or high school, what would you do in your classroom to make sure that they're successful, or at least the steps to ensure an opportunity for accessing material? Go ahead, Mary Beth.
Well, I have a small group, but I was thinking we would do one slide together for sure, and then ask all the questions. Maybe even divide one slide whole class, but then have the 3 different groups maybe do each little box you had there. How about that? Is that a good idea? And then I'd see how that went. And then if that didn't go well, I'd try something else. But that's what I would start with. I would definitely do it whole class so they could see how it could be done.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think we definitely have to do some direct instruction in terms of it's a skill. You know, I think any skill we ask students to do is first explicitly teach that skill so they can use it after, just like we did, for example, a quickie with a Jamboard, just to get used to it and then now use it in context, right? Matt, you mentioned this idea of like, you know, the importance of prompts and sentence frames. Do you get different responses from students when you do provide sentence frames versus when you don't?
It just gives them a starting point. Sometimes I feel like if you don't give them a place to start, you know, most of them are, I mean, most students are well-intentioned. They want to participate, but some of them, if they just feel like, okay, like I got to be honest, I told Janine, I was like, hey, I thought we were just doing one of the documents, and, you know, she kind of steered me in the right direction, but I was like, okay, I kind of felt uncomfortable because I was like, okay, I'm not exactly 100% sure what we're supposed to do here. But when you get them in those little situations, if you say, here's where I want you guys to start, here's your questions. Like I love those questions that were on the corner of the Jamboard. They kind of help you direct your focus. I think kids need that big time. And I think just like, I think it was Mary Beth said, well, you know, to do it together as a class at first so that they can kind of see it modeled and then take the training wheels off later on in the semester. I think that's a good idea too.
With almost anything that you do, even if you've done this kind of a practice, you know, a half a dozen times, it's always good to model. Here's, you know, here, remember, these are the steps that we're going to take in doing this, and have one document that maybe you all start off with, and just really work on the I do, we do, and then turn it over to the you do for the students. Is that setting them up for success?
Yeah, and I think I think I would add to that and just say, I would even start off with something low stakes, something that they relate to. So whether it's pop culture, you know, video games, whatever it might be that kids in your grade level relate to, you know, bring that in. And so then now it's like, now I'm an expert in this. So that gives me confidence. So then now I'm learning a new skill that I can add to it. So now where I'm not as confident about history during the gold rush, then I could actually apply that because I've learned the skill. So I'm going to go with group 3. Somebody else talking? Yeah. So Teresa and Keisha, if you guys don't mind, yours are a little different. I don't know if one of you wants to share your screen and how your experience was different than others.
Yeah, I think, let me see.
Can you share your screen, Keisha?
No, it says I cannot share while you're sharing.
Okay, so then I'm done sharing. So I gave them a different document to use, and I didn't want to give too many at one time, so I gave them something different. And it's just a historical thinking table, and it's a different way of organizing those things. It wasn't as detailed, but also it's more visual.
Yeah, so I think this was helpful, well, for me, but I could see it for especially for like my ELs, my students on IEPs or 504s, like having this structure would be good. Being able to like draw over the source might overwhelm some of them.
Teresa, do you want to add it to anything in terms of your experience with it?
I just think that it helped, but I was really focused on, I think this came up, I was really focused on answering the questions. And so I was skimming and scanning the actual articles to get the information to fill out that chart. I didn't get to the part where I had to write the essay, which probably would have, or the paragraphs, which would have required me to read it a little bit more in depth. So then when Jose started asking us more in-depth questions, I was having to go back to the text because I hadn't read it thoroughly.
So I'm wondering if I could do something differently next time to help students make sure that they do get the information first, like the gist of the source, and then go back and answer those questions. What could I have done differently to kind of guide you to get, you know, the gist of it and then move forward? Because you're right, most students are going to be like, okay, what's the question? Let me answer it. What's the question? Let me answer it. Versus like the why. What's the big thing going on here? Well, goal was discovered and there's a little discrepancy. Like, do we know exactly when, right? Or how?
Are you posing a question there?
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, I guess maybe a little rhetorical, but I'm really kind of posing a question, like the idea, would you have done something differently to get students to actually read the document first, like to understand the document, and then have the historical thinking card prompts or questions thereafter?
I think that especially as a elementary school teacher, and you know, and we all have ELs and we all have struggling students, and just making sure that there's that read with them. You know, that first read is just that the basics, right? And then I feel like what we were doing, we were going into a little bit more of a close read. So I feel like I would have definitely wanted to read the text with them and make sure they could access all the words and understand it before I asked them to go and do something more with it. And that would have required them to read the text.
And I think everybody pretty much agrees. And I did it intentionally because I skipped some steps, but
Well,
also
we're adults and you would think I would read it.
no, because guess what? We revert back to whatever makes sense. Like in terms of what's a path of least resistance, you're giving me questions, I'm going to answer those, right? So I think if we have a desired result, you know, from our students, we need to do those pivots and those moves in our instruction, just like the teacher was doing in that lesson study or that lesson observation, right? So yeah, that wasn't perfect. Just that one little tweak, I think, can make a difference in terms of, okay, now I know what it is. Now what's my role in my group? You know, what questions do we need to come to talk to? So anything else? So Mary Beth.
And I like the idea of starting with something totally different. That would have been really easy to understand. And then, in other words, yeah, so you already said it. I don't need to repeat it, but practice on something easy and go to this.
Well, I think I'm going to follow up on Mary Beth too, is practicing on something easy, but really you're doing the modeling as a think aloud. So I'm doing this first, and really kind of so that students can see that process of how what I'm thinking and what I'm doing, because that's really where it gets to that essence of, you know, quote unquote reading like a historian. How am I going to read that? And if you model it for students with something that maybe they're more familiar with or more pop culture or whatever the case is, and then even as you model, even with an example, maybe the first document in a series, if you're looking at more than one, doing it as a whole group and really modeling that process for them.
So Janine, I have a question, because I was wondering about that whole modeling process. Because I know when we source a document in history, we want to actually identify some of those key details, like who wrote it, because sometimes we'll get lost and it'll give us context. So maybe not the historical thinking cards that have several prompts, but maybe just like a basic, hey, whenever we read a historical document, or any document, we need to figure out who's the author. All of us, we need to figure out when it was written, what is it, you know, and then now we have, because really it gives the students some context for sourcing that document, right?
And maybe even the background, what event are we talking about? Because that would then also give them, if they're looking at a secondary source that comes along a couple of, 100 years later, okay, well, this is a secondary source, somebody who's writing about something, they weren't there. It's a couple of things. They could either be coming at it from a specific bias of something happening in that time period 100 years later that is prompting them to look at this in a new way. Is there a bias there? Or is this somebody that's pulling together lots of bits and pieces, multiple perspectives, and coming up with a new kind of conclusion that maybe somebody at that time could not have come up with? But it at least gives, if students are looking at that sourcing, which is huge, that gives them a place to start with, if we teach them that why sourcing is important, right? So modeling that whole piece first, and just every time. So it's what I do as a citizen, right? And I'm looking at, maybe it's an article on a piece of legislation that I'm following. Well, the first thing I'm going to say, okay, well, who wrote this? And then I know what, I can have maybe an idea of, because of the publication it's in, whether it's biased in one way or another, and then I know how I'm reading it. It's the same concept that, and so it's a skill that if we teach our students the skill, it's something that's going to be with them then for life, and they can utilize it in so many different fashions. So it's transferable knowledge to other applications.
And right now, it'd be perfect. You could, I don't know how I would do it with older kids, but have them watch an event on PBS and then watch the same thing described on Fox. And sometimes you can't, no wonder they believe like they do. That's what they're getting. I mean, I don't want to go there, but
I'm not even sure if I would do that, Mary Beth, with kids, but I love seeing something more of a documentary versus the film adaptation.
oh, all right, all
Can
right,
I
all
find
right.
something, does that make sense? I think I would, because I think that would be a little more low stakes, and that they would get that. So the difference between maybe images of, people coming into port from the sinking of the Titanic versus the film, that kind of thing. Or something, I don't know, something that may be more contemporary or, I'm not sure.
No,
There.
and I think it's great that even thinking about it, going back to, for not necessarily students that are younger are going to relate to some of these, but that they're part of popular culture. So they have some information, and how much of that information is misinformation. And we tend to believe it's all true, that Jack and Rose actually were a real thing, versus, how much of it was romanticized or given some freedom there. In terms of now thinking about that scaffolding, there's always work to do with our students when we're building some of these activities. It's a small group activity, whether you're doing it in the classroom or you're doing it, distance learning, it does require some scaffolding to go with it, and also some structure, I think, in terms of success. Depending on your background, some of these others might be a little more. So the one that group 3 used is a historical thinking table. It can be changed to anything. That the table was really important though, but I like the visual of, well, here's the direct question. Is there do they corroborate or do they conflict as far as information? And if you look at the date, it would kind of conflict a little bit. So then the fact that it's visual on that one sheet is going to be helpful. Obviously there's some that are more geared towards elementary. What do we ask when we read? And then the high school version of this is, a little more advanced collaborative reading. So the questions are going to be a little higher level, and they're going to ask students to do a little bit more. So I guess the question is this: how do we engage students in this type of inquiry-based learning? Where do we start? And I think, Janine, you're going to take off after this, but it's going to give us an idea of where we want to start with our students.
Sandy, did you have a question or a comment?
I had a comment. Oh,
Go ahead and turn on your mic, Sandy. We can't hear you.
Yeah.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
It says mute. Never mind.
The mute button's
So-
slow, I found out. Yeah.
The graphic organizer, how you had the names, if it were up here, I could tell you, and it had different questions and things. If students were to be able to take it to the next level, let's say on Costa's levels 2 or 3, they were to plug in images of, let's say, Marshall, let's say, Sutter or somebody else, or of images of Gold Rush, or an image of a newspaper from that time period of what was happening. So yeah, so as they're answering those questions with text, but they're also plugging in images. So your ELs are connecting those words with those pictures, and there's some relevancy there for them. Where students who are having a hard time conceptualizing things can see an image along with the answer. And it's kind of fun too for students to research, because they're going to have to know what they're talking about in order to find the most appropriate picture for it as well, or image, to take it to to another level for students, especially with distance learning. That's all.
No, I think it's a great idea. I think in terms of just providing as many visuals for students, because you're right. I think our discussion is going to be different. I think if you present students with this primary source, whether it's upper elementary or middle school, I don't think they're going to have that rich conversation unless they have some background with this, and so that maybe having a little bit of visual or even a short video doesn't give away all the information, but gives them the gist, what it might be.
And they're also learning how to discern what's relevant, what's important, what's trustable for them to use as well, the sources. So you're doing a lot of different kinds of scaffolding with that, and all kinds of different other skills to do this little graphic organizer right here. So you can plug in a lot of things that would be really powerful for students to learn as they're going through this process.
Perfect. So Janine, we're going to jump into kind of that segue about having us think about how we're engaged, and then connecting that to student engagement. Do you want me to continue to share my screen, or do you want to share your screen?
No, go ahead and share your screen. We're already there, and it's not messing up. So let's talk about, engaging students in the process of moving beyond just us asking them questions, but getting them to really kind of do that heavy lifting, that heavy cognitive lifting, and starting off with some things that are sometimes kind of low stakes, but really get students to be thinking about it. So this, there is on the New York Times, has what they call a learning network, their education sources, and they have this, and they put these out weekly, and they call it What's Going On in This Picture. And this is one of their What's Going On in This Picture. But really the strategy is something that the Library of Congress really kind of got started. And so we're going to take a look at this. I want you to take 30 seconds and then think about, you can use the chat to answer, or when we come back in, feel free to jump in. What's going on in the picture? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more information can you find or would you want to find? Okay, so let's open it up and do a little discussion. What do you think is happening? And feel free to just unmute yourself. What's happening in the picture, that image?
I'm gonna go ahead and share it again, just so everybody can go back to the same screen.
I just felt like it was the familiar thing we see when we see families saying, happy birthday or get well soon. I can't really see what the balloons say to maybe a loved one who has COVID and they can't go see them, but they're trying to express their love for someone who's really sick. And I say that because they have masks, and that's what we see a lot right now when we're looking at what's going on in our country.
Very cool. I know Sandy has a question too, so whenever you get a chance to get to her.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
Sorry, no, I just accidentally pressed that. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, also, here we go. There's a down at the bottom, we've got a date on here too, if that helps with any, thinking about. So this is May 17th, their picture from May 18th. Someone might be leaving the hospital. Some maybe a surprise. They are masked up. Get well soon to a loved one.
A baby?
Okay. Maybe a baby. Yeah. And so you've already mentioned, Teresa mentioned, kind of some things that made her think that, and you all mentioned too, the idea of the balloons. It looks like the building looks like it could be a hospital, the way it's kind of structured there, people looking inside. The people standing here, I mean, anybody have anything they can say about the people that are holding the balloons looking in?
I know we had a hard time before discussing this picture to use. Is that a nightgown that one lady's wearing, or we never figured it out? I don't know if anybody else has thoughts. Like, is she the one that is in the hospital, or I don't know.
It looks like a family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think, can you all see the one in the middle that Stacy's talking about? So she's right below the balloons. So if you go right below it, you see the mask, and she has a hospital gown, it looks like. Just kind of surprised to see that as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's just a house dress or a longer dress or.
She's
And
wearing so
go ahead.
No, she's wearing a watch. So she's Maybe house dress.
I would also talk out loud and thinking what I know about hospitals. Like, this is not the emergency room, and hospital rooms don't usually have a door to the outside. So I almost feel like, is it like a business that somebody's wishing somebody well? Because in a hospital, you wouldn't have access to a room like that. Like, it looks like there's a door they're waving through.
So I think one of the things that you all are exhibiting here, we'll go on to the next one just in the interest of time so we can finish up. But one of the things that you're bringing up is that you're asking more questions than finding conclusions. And so that's where we need to, that's part of the process of getting students to do this. It's not necessarily finding the answers, but asking the questions and then finding that last one there. What more can you find? Where you start picking apart. Oh, well, this looks like a family. Oh, well, the balloons are all pink. Oh, well, you know, those kinds of things. We're looking for evidence that might draw us to conclusions, but we have questions, right? The cool thing about using the New York Times with these, they pull pictures from the previous week and utilize those. And then they'll have a reveal. I think it's like Wednesday or Thursday that they reveal what the picture is all about. It's something that somebody's taken. So you can come back with students and have those answers. This is an activity that at the, you know, right now, like I said, the New York Times is free for all high school educators and their students for the next year through September of 2021. Right now, you can access it. But you can also pull these. The Learning Network is available for all teachers, whether you register with them or not. And you can pull these pictures into your learning management system and have the discussion, you know, regardless of whether your students are 13, you find an appropriate picture and you can do that. So go on to the next one, Jose, because this one was a fun one for us to take a look at and talk about as a group.
So
We'll do this one more time.
A little more controversial. There you go.
Okay, same thing. And this is, like I said, the Library of Congress has this protocol. What do you, there for older students, it's what do you observe? I can't remember. Anyways, but you can go to the Library of Congress site, and essentially the idea is there. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? And so it's working kind of along the lines of what we just did, but it's looking at, okay, what's happening? Really just identifying what we see. What are those specific things? So let's do this one. Let's do this together. So what are the things that you see? We're not inferring anything at this point. We're not making any judgments, but what do you see? And feel free to unmute. And jump.
Kids getting ready to dump a statue in the river
Kids getting ready to dump a statue in the river.
that they've taken down, looks like.
Okay.
I see people more like me than my husband.
Okay.
I see a young man laying down and taking a picture of the statue in the bottom left-hand corner.
Okay.
I see them, the people that are dumping, a lot of them are wearing masks.
Okay.
I see
I
a
see
lot
a lot of people too.
Yeah, I see a lot. Yeah, you don't think about them because it's, you know, there's a foreground and a background, but there's a lot of people in that background as well.
Okay, so now then let's make some judgments. What do you think? What do you think here? What are we inferring? What's going on? Like I can infer the masks, it's pretty contemporary.
It
They're
might
young.
be a Confederate statue.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe a Confederate statue.
Looks like a woman, like she has long hair though.
Oh, it's
Am I
interesting. Right.
missing something?
Okay.
Right. Because even if you look at their whatever they're wearing, it's a long coat, right?
Mhm, a long
Nice.
coat.
Yeah. And you do see something on like the elbow, kind of like an older attire where they have those, I don't know if it's called a petticoat or not still, but just the folded what would you call that? The thick fold at the elbow.
cuff?
Yeah, the cuff. Thank you.
Mhm.
Cuff.
Yeah, and I guess I'm inferring that young man in the bottom left-hand corner is probably going to share this on social media.
Mhm.
If I was gonna bet, I was gonna bet that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there's something going on with the statue too, because I see that there looks like there's paint or something on the front.
Mhm. Red, yeah, right.
Vandalize first and then,
Been removed. All right, so then what do you wonder?
Who is it?
Who is it? Where are they?
Well, who is the statue of, and what city? There's something building in the background, big building.
yeah, you can't really tell.
Can't really read. There's some word on identifier on it, but it's hard to read. All right, Jose, do the big reveal, because this one was the one that that stumped us, because Matt, we were totally in your camp as we started looking at this.
Right. I think we all assumed, because of our experience here in the U.S., that it was a Confederate statue or a statue that was controversial in history. It is controversial in history, except it's not a Confederate one. It's actually, this is actually a British image. So it's actually in England, and I'm not sure what city, but this is the removal of a statue that was of a former slave owner. And so, and he was, I forget what he was famous for in terms of, like, you know, economic prosperity, but he had owned, I think, a large number of slaves. And so he had been controversial for a while, like many here in the US, but this is the result, you know, similar time to what was happening just about a month ago with us, or, you know, 2 months ago here in the US.
So, and so go ahead and go on to the next one. Then let's talk about this. What kind of concept or theme or big idea in your classroom could you use to connect an image such as this one to how much you use it?
How about we give them a little bit of time to process? And then this time, is it okay if they kind of respond in the chat?
Yeah.
Yeah. Give them about, you know, take 30 seconds, think about whatever you're teaching, but I think that was our goal.
I don't know if any of you want the reference, but back on page 7 was kind of where we reflected on click.
Yeah, some really good insights here in terms of finding concepts that you could connect an image such as this to. It doesn't have to be just, you know, obviously a world history or a US history, but looking at some of the conceptual pieces like laws, you know, civil rights, unrest, the American Revolution, whatever the kind of that case may be. How long should statues last? I heard somebody say that statues should only they should have a life expectancy, because, you know, things change, right? And so you know, that might be another one. But this kind of an image, one of the things that we've talked about, this is something that you could use, this kind of technique to, like somebody said here, would get your students, you know, engaged. A great way to get kids engaged. Think about a technique like this at the beginning of a unit, or at a time period in a unit maybe where things kind of lull and you need to hype them up a little bit. And some topics are scary with your kids. You have to know your students. That's one of the other challenges with distance learning, right? Really knowing our kiddos to figure out, now, is this one I want to use for this, or is there something else? Is there another image? But photos, especially contemporary photos, showing students that concept of relevance that we talked about earlier, making it relevant to our current time, using any image with somebody in masks right now, students would know that this is a contemporary image, and make that connection to their lived experience. So that could be a great way to engage them. So, and get them to start asking questions. That's what we were talking about, what Morgan asked earlier. You know, getting students to ask questions is a good way to get them to do that lifting and ask the questions and transfer that from us as instructors. There's some great ideas, y'all, in here.
Well, and just thinking with my fourth graders, at first when we were planning this, I thought that was a little bit over their head. But when you really actually look at the standards that they're having to do, like Jose had put in the chat, the democracy versus the different kinds of government, and thinking along the lines of, you know, teaching fourth grade, this would be a scary photo to talk about with kids, but they do bring up this stuff in my Zooms all the time already, and really trying to give them the option of, well, in a democracy, this is people, you know, expressing their thoughts and discussing what that democracy really means. And those are the really like deep and thoughtful things that they need to get to in the standards, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're up to the very end at 5:30. So we didn't finish everything, but I think we definitely have a good start in terms of inquiry and reflecting on inquiry in our classrooms. So I'm going to ask you to do two things. One is please fill out the feedback, and then we'll share with a couple who had to leave early. And then also the registration for our next session, which is on the 25th of this month, which is going to be about students developing their own questions. The link is there. And I'll make sure to also share the entire flyer with those of you who attended today, but please share with your colleagues. It'd be awesome to have, you know, more of a discussion, you know, larger group to have some different ideas being brought in. We appreciate that. We appreciate your time. Thank you. I know it's definitely challenging. So the fact that you're taking some time, and I know some of us have kiddos at home too. So my kiddo was trying to play video games behind me and I could hear him. I'm not sure if you could hear him, but I just told him, as long as you're quiet where I can't hear you or you're whispering, go ahead.
And making sure as we go forward, taking techniques that are strategies that are beneficial to our students, and trying to, and having those hard discussions as colleagues about what does this look like in the digital and the virtual environment, in addition to the traditional classroom. So, because at some point, you know, I don't think for a generation we'll be stuck at home or with our masks on. So at some point we'll be face to face with our kiddos again. So what can we take away? What can we learn to kind of perfect in both platforms so that we can use it, that we're ready to roll either way? So hopefully those discussions can take place too.
And I'm going to share one more link. It's actually the Constitution Day virtual conference by LA County Office of Ed. So if you have 3 hours Saturday morning, right, it's a big if, but if you have that time, it's free, and they usually do some pretty good work. So you know, just something else that's out there for you, but I'm going to put that link in right now. With that said, are there any other questions for us? Thank you for sticking around the full 2 hours. I know it's pretty heavy work this late in the day.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Bring your friends. Bring a friend.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you, Teresa. Bye, everyone. Have a good afternoon. See you next time.